Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sunrise Project podcast. We have with us today a dear friend of mine, Ann. And thank you for joining us on this podcast. We have an opportunity to talk with our neighbors, to listen in, to journey a bit together, and to learn from each other, because there's some surprising things that we get to discover when we listen. And to have conversations on race, and sometimes talking about how to have conversations on race, or why to have conversations on race. But yeah, so thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you here. Ann, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. It's a joy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where in our community might we find you out and about?
Out and about. Well, I homeschool my 4 kiddos. So we are out and about doing all kinds of things in the community. I take my older girls to the YMCA to work out. So hello, gym buddies, if you're watching. We love that. And then I also help lead prayer at my church at Pursuit. And I tag along on Gabby's adventures with her Remembrance Project and the work that she does for the MLK celebration. So I'm along for the ride with Gabby.
So we have a couple different questions that we ask everybody, and it's always fun to hear the different kinds of things that come up. And I usually intro this whole thing with talking about process. I kind of waited because that's kind of what we're going to get into together more. But I'm going to mention it again anyway. Yeah. So our question is, why does race matter to you? And the reality is that all of our answers are different to that, and they have different ways that they, different pieces that come out and different nuances, and we're all in process of kind of exploring that question in different ways.
Yeah.
So for you right now,
Today,
why does race matter to you?
That's such a big and broad question. And there's so many different stories that come to mind. I think foundationally, I do believe that God created all people beautifully, uniquely, wonderfully, and that every life is precious and matters, and they should be treated with love and kindness, respect, and dignity. I think I also grew up here in Oregon, which is a predominantly white state. I grew up in a very small town that was almost exclusively white. And then I left the state to go away for college, and I had the beauty of living in Southern California. I had the opportunity to travel internationally a number of times, and I got to see how beautiful and rich and vibrant the world was, and all these different people and their stories, their lives that I got to interact with that I didn't have the opportunity to do so growing up in my hometown. And so coming back to Oregon as an adult later in life, it matters because I want to have those conversations with my children. I want to have this be a state and a place where all people feel welcome and loved, they feel safe, and then they can call this home as well. So yeah, there's probably a lot of different stories, but that would be a part of my story.
I hear you on that. Now, we've been just recently added this question about why does Grants Pass Remembrance and the work that happens there matter to you?
Yeah, well, I think it's so exciting that we are able to have these conversations here in town, and that there's so many amazing, smart, brilliant, beautiful people who care and want to make this a place where all of our neighbors feel welcomed, feel loved, that they really feel like their voice is heard. And so it's beautiful to be a part of that group and to listen to these people, and then have people like Taylor who can lead and guide and shape and have lived experiences that I don't have, but I can hear and learn from. So it's just beautiful to be a part of this wonderful, growing group of people.
Oh, I hear you there. Now, we were having a conversation last week, and I actually forget the context, but it was in a text, which was wonderful because I could copy it. And you had said this, and I would love to unpack this together. You had said vulnerability and humility are the keys to growth and change. Now, we unpacked that a bit in our texting together, and I saved some of those quotes if we'd like.
Okay.
But I'd love to, starting with vulnerability, talk about that more. How is vulnerability a key to growth and change? How do you see that as being key?
I think it's so easy to want to be self-protective, and we don't want to look ignorant, or in this case, if we're talking about race, we don't want to look like we're racist or that we're a part of hurting people or we're a part of marginalizing people. We also don't want to come across necessarily as arrogant or know-it-all. There's just a lot of defenses that we put up to being seen and known. And sometimes we're afraid of what people's responses might be. If we share where we really are in our process, even if we are trying to grow and learn and change, it's scary to say, well, this is what I think. And then you're facing perhaps anger or ostracization or rejection. You just don't know what you're going to get. But oftentimes when we do share, when we open ourselves up, like we were in the training today with Common Grounds Conversations, and just the grace and the kindness with which Emily and Mike responded to people's questions and concerns, their thoughts and feelings. And I feel like more often than not, we are surprised by how kind and gracious people are when we're trying to grow. But we have to take that leap of faith and step out in vulnerability and say, like, I don't know, or this is what I've always believed. What do you think about that? Or is this true? This is what I've always heard and known and seen. But is there another side to the story?
Yeah. Now, just so everybody's on the same page with us, Ann and I got to join in on a workshop that Emily and Mike hosted with Common Ground Conversations. They've been on our podcast before, had a phenomenal interview with them. And that was just a really neat space to get to be. So is that 3 hours? 4 hours? Yeah. So that was our morning, and we got to be in that space together. I was really struck by something that you were saying in there about how scary it can be to let people know where we're at in the process. And I don't think that ever ends. I think that's always, I used to think maybe I'll get to a point where it won't be scary anymore. I think it's always scary.
That could be.
There's a way in which, even for me, in doing, like I've now been in this kind of a space, quite a bit, and I'm still not used to the moments where, like, oh gosh, I shared some piece of myself. How did that go? Like that scary feeling of, I was just sharing earlier with you, Ann, about how there was one podcast that I had to listen over because I was like, oh gosh, I totally was vulnerable, and I don't know if that's going to land well, or did I honor, like my biggest barrier can often be, did what I say hurt anybody? Is that going to be hurtful? And this happens in life, right? But because it's a recorded conversation, I actually got to listen to it over and had this moment of, oh, that was okay. Like that, I don't think that hurt anybody. And I think that, but even as much as I talk about process and being with each other in the process, and that it's messy, it's still hard.
Yeah.
It's just still hard. And vulnerability is something that I feel like, oh, you had said this. So glad I wrote this down. Why is vulnerability hard? You had said, vulnerability takes courage because we recognize that people will see our flaws and all, and we might be rejected. We also risk being viewed as ignorant or arrogant, which you talked about a bit ago, something we usually avoid at all costs. And just that naming of how hard vulnerability is, and to keep moving into that, but that it's also necessary in this piece. We can't go anywhere without that vulnerability.
I was thinking too, as you were sharing, that even if we do say something that is hurtful, even if it's unintentional, I think we forget the power of being able to go back and make amends. Sometimes we think that we're going to be stuck in that place forever. But there's power in reconciliation. There's power in apologizing. There's power. That's the humility piece, right? And it's okay to say too, like, I don't have all the answers, and I probably never will, but I can gather around me a really good group of people, and together in community, we can come up with the answers that we need. So, but I think just knowing that you're not stuck in that place, even if you do mess up, like it's okay.
Yeah.
There's still the ability to move forward, to change and to grow and to learn from that. And hopefully if you're able to make amends for where hurt was caused.
It's so funny how, like making amends and apologizing, that feels like a muscle I know how to move. You know, we talk to our kids about it.
Right.
That's a thing that we teach all the time. I apologize to my kids, and I still forget that. I still need to be reminded that, oh, that's right. If I do hurt somebody, that's not the end. That I can move into that space too. And it's just astounding how much vulnerability can stop us from having hard conversations that are good conversations to have. Yeah.
And that was one of the things that, again, referencing the training we were at this morning, that Emily was saying that as she's had really difficult conversations with Mike throughout their marriage and their life, that it's on the other side of those really difficult conversations and where she's been able to be really vulnerable, that she's had the most growth and change. But you have to walk through those difficult conversations first to see that growth. And so it can be a little bit, like you said, of a messy and painful process, but it's really worthwhile.
It's really worthwhile.
Yeah.
The word discomfort's coming to mind. That piece of like, we often think that do whatever we can to avoid discomfort, but so often it's in those moments of discomfort where some really good, beautiful things can happen. And if our objective is to remain comfortable, then some of those things won't happen.
Right.
And so, you might not experience the discomfort of having been vulnerable, but you also are going to miss out on some really beautiful things if comfort is the goal or the highest.
Yeah. You're going to miss out on
value.
growth. You're going to miss out on relationships. You're going to miss out on seeing community transformation, all those things if we want to stay comfortable.
Yeah.
But I think safety and comfort shouldn't be our goal in life, or you will live a very small life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's beauty to invulnerability and really being known, being known for who you are and where you're at right now, and letting people love you in that place and accept you and welcome you and being willing to walk alongside you. Like what a gift that is versus not letting yourself be known. It's very isolating. Yeah. So even just exposing yourself a little and where you really are, it really strengthens community, I think.
It does. It really does. Expose yourself to, say that again.
Just to expose yourself a little, who you really are, what you really think, what you really value. But then again, the humility piece is being willing to open your heart and your ears to receive truth in case your lens is a little skewed. Like we all have bias. We all have a worldview that we look and see through, and it's not always correct. So if we can really share our true selves, what we think and what we know or what we've seen, but we're willing to listen and grow with those around us, like that's a really powerful combination because then we don't stay in that same place.
Let's dive deeper into humility. That was a really good, there is this way in which they need to be paired. That one without the other doesn't quite keep you moving. Yeah. I don't know if forward is even the term I want, but so I wanted to. Shall I share one of your quotes from the humility piece? I just love this. Do you love hearing your quotes? Okay. No, I want to hear what you say about humility. Why is humility key to growth and change?
Some of this might be what I texted, so I guess you can let me know.
I will.
I think it's important. Humility is important. It just softens your heart to really hear the people around you because we all have different lived experiences. And my experience is not the only truth. Like your lived experience and my neighbors' lived experiences and the people in our community, like their stories are true as well. But if I don't have humility to hear that, I will assume that only my truth it's the only reality. And so I think it takes that willingness again to say, I don't know it all. I haven't heard it all. I have not lived it all. but other people have, and I'm willing to hear their stories. I'm willing to recognize the power of their voice, because I think it's true that our community is only as strong as, our most vulnerable. And so we need to be willing to listen to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you hear what you said a week
Sure.
ago? We have to have humility to be willing to listen to those who have gone before us, those with lived experiences we don't have, to those voices who don't have the power they should, and the humility to see where our beliefs and actions have missed the mark. I think that last piece, I'm going to dig into even more, that humility to see where our actions and beliefs have missed the mark, because that ties in with vulnerability. And you kind of introduced that a bit of vulnerability is letting ourselves be exposed a bit, what we're actually thinking, what's actually going on, but tying with humility that when we do share that, that we're ready to learn, that we're still ready to, and maybe that means changing or adjusting something and growing and adding that in and expanding our lens.
Yeah. This morning, I think you said, was it you who said we underestimate the power of curiosity? And I love that, because I think that ties in with the humility, that if we can be curious about the people around us, about the things that are happening, about other people's stories, it's just a softer and more welcoming stance to take. And it prepares our hearts to hear what other people might have to share. And then I think you're more willing to maybe pivot a little and do things a little differently when you come from that place. So I just love that idea too of if humility feels like a little hard to swallow,
Right?
That you can start
we don't talk about humility
you
much,
can start
do
with
we?
curiosity. You could start with being curious, right? And wondering, I wonder what that is like for that other person. I wonder as they've had these experiences, how that's impacted their life. Or I wonder how they view our community or their neighborhood or the schools. Just those different things. So you can start with curiosity, just asking questions.
Yeah.
And then, listening, taking the time to listen.
That is an interesting point. Humility isn't a word that we talk about very much in our culture. How would you define humility? I know, right? I'm glad I get to ask the questions.
I don't know that I have the perfect description. I mean, the first thing that just popped into my mind was thinking more of others than yourself. Just being able to, put yourself a little less so that you can let the others around you increase, if that makes sense, in conversation or in life.
Yeah.
What's your definition of humility?
It's a great question. I don't know. I'll just kind of build off of yours. I guess when I think about the opposite of humility, or just that like putting yourself forward, this need to, and I can identify many areas in life where what I think is the thing that I want to bring, it most often comes out in my relationship with my husband, which is super worth thinking about. Those vulnerable, the relationships that are closest to me, where I feel like I've got to, it's harder to kind of let go of, wait a minute, I don't need to be afraid of not having space, because I know that I'm loved and cared for, and I will have time to talk. I don't have to make sure that I'm the one that's is pushing my thing forward. Yeah. That I can let go of that, and trust that there is a good process that will come from that. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense, but what if we also start, in exploring humility, sometimes it seems like it's easier to understand from the edges of it as opposed to the center of it. So what makes humility hard?
What makes humility hard? I think just what you were talking about, it's easy to live in a scarcity mentality where I need my ideas to be heard. I need to be seen. Yes. I need to make sure that I'm taken care of and that I have enough. And if you start from Not that we don't all, we all still need our basic needs to be met. So I'm not negating that.
Yes, yes.
But if we live in that belief system, it's very, very limiting. Instead of trusting, again, that there will be enough for me, that there's enough for all of us to thrive and to flourish. So if I can make space for others, if I can step back and not take the highest place for myself or think I have the best ideas or the only ideas, and we can invite others. But it's hard to do that. It's hard to trust. I think that, and trust that we'll be seen, we'll be noticed, that we'll have a place. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of scarcity mentality in this world, instead of just trusting there's enough for us all. And the more people we welcome into that, the more that we thrive and flourish and grow. So I think that's what makes humility a little bit hard.
Yeah. That scarcity idea is something that I've heard you talk about before, and it really does. I can relate to it. Like I can feel the moments and think of the moments where like, oh yeah, I'm totally operating out of this belief that like there's not enough. There's not enough, and so I've gotta go for it. Yeah.
And we live in a competitive culture.
We do.
Where it's important to be the best at something or be number one. And so it takes humility, even if you are the best at something or you are number one, to lift others up around you and to really celebrate them and who they are and their lives, the things they're doing, to champion other people. Like that just takes a lot of grace and I think a lot of inner confidence. But it's beautiful when we see those people doing that. Like it's amazing to watch. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I think part of it's cultural too.
I think so too. And it's interesting. I don't know if I can't, at least in my life, relate to like, oh, maybe you are doing it great, but it's okay. You still can. Usually it's a fear that if someone else is on the playing field too, it's a fear that, oh no, there's not going to be enough for me because I'm not going to make it first, you know? Right. And I have to fight to, like, it'll pop up in random spots and I'll have to fight to remind myself what I know is true. Yeah. But it's wild how often that fight has to come up. Like like, wait a minute, that's not the assumption that I'm living off of, that there's not enough. Like, no, I believe there's enough. Yeah. But even in the midst of that, it's a hard one to push against. I think it is very much human nature and culture and whatever else it means. It's in there.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see what you wrote here. Humility takes courage because we are acknowledging that we don't know it all or best, but by being in community, diverse, vibrant community, probably does hold the answers we seek. I do like that bit. And I do like the acknowledging that we don't know it all or best.
It's hard.
It's really hard. Yeah. There's a real value around knowledge, I think, also in our culture. Yeah. And so there's this fear of being exposed that we might not know it is it's a pretty big thing. Yeah. I think, I certainly run into that.
Yeah. But I think we find, again, when we share, oh, I don't know that, or I've never heard of that person, or I don't know that term, or, just with the race, I didn't know about systemic racism, I don't know, or redlining, or just different things that come up. Yeah. I think, again, we find that people are gracious to share with us and educate us and to give us resources that we didn't have before. But if we never share that we don't know something, then we're just cheating ourselves on the opportunity to learn and grow. Yeah. And most people want to share the things that they know. They do want to share their resources and their richness and their stories with us. So yeah, we're also stealing from them, I guess, the opportunity to share all the wonderful things that they have that we don't have access to yet.
Yeah. Yeah. There's getting to ask is such a Like that's one of the pieces of learning how to ask questions when someone brings up a term or a thing that you don't know about, learning how to say, oh, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And then there's the flip side of being in a position where you're in conversations and people are talking about something and they don't know that they don't know about something.
Yes. That's always interesting.
And you might know that there's another layer going on. One of the things after the trainings that I think Emily had said was something about you might find that you're in coming days and weeks, there might be conversations that come up and you might get to share some of this knowledge. They had a phrase of truth has the power to transform. Is that the phrase? And that really is like, I believe that phrase. That's very true. And it's a daunting situation to be in a space where you might have information, but the question isn't being asked because they might not know to even ask that, like, and how, like, the process of vulnerability and humility that takes place in sharing. Actually, I'm gonna use an example here. I used to work with first-time parents in like a partnering program, and so we would do educational things. We'd come into the home and bring in child development information and just all different kinds of things. And they taught us a technique of when the parent brings something up and they're talking about something and that you have something that might be meaningful to like incorporate for them to incorporate into it, you can just ask like, oh, I have some information about that. Are you interested in hearing about it, or would you like to know, or like forming it in a question, so that they have that space to say yes or no. And I mean, gosh, I think all the time these were in relationships. We had relationships, but they had an opportunity to say yes if they wanted to say yes, and of course they could say no if they wanted to say no. But even just that opportunity to be asked and to say it open them up just a bit more to to kind of be ready to hear something, which I find is a really helpful parallel in that element of when we're in conversations and we might know something that isn't already known, to say, hey, I actually know something about that, or there's something that I learned recently that actually has to do with this. Would you be interested in hearing? That can be really kind of a graceful way to move forward in vulnerability and humility.
And how you're sharing it.
With how you're sharing it, because it is totally possible to not say anything for fear of like, gosh, I don't know how this is going to be received. And I don't know what to do with that. Or to, I've had my seasons where you got to hear this.
Yes, whether you want to or not.
Whether you want to
it is
or
true.
not. It's true. And that's all that matters.
Yes. I've had those moments myself. That I can think of. Well, I was thinking too, humility plays in that also, because you realize if they do decline, if they say no, I'm really not interested, they're not ready, that you have the humility to hang on to that. But I think even in gracefully accepting that no, it keeps the door open for conversations down the road.
Yes.
Instead of just slamming it shut for sure by either just sharing with them anyway when they don't want to hear it. But because you never know, they might hear it with someone else, or they might be willing to talk to you later about that. So again, I think that takes humility to say, okay, you're not ready, and that's totally fine. And that you just hold on to what you know and keep trusting the process of building a relationship with people and valuing the relationship with that person in that moment. I think is really important.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing to think about how we can divorce truth from well, I've often talked about truth and love, but but from people, this, if you're going to value people, like truth does have the power to transform. But if you devalue people in the context of wanting to value truth, like it just doesn't work. Like there must be a valuing of people in order for the value of truth to actually be heard.
To be heard.
There was another piece that I wanted to. One of the last pieces that you shared was about vulnerability and humility. They're both so necessary and so rare today. Do you think that there are pieces that, like, how do we support each other in making it not so rare? Are there
ways?
Are there ways? What does this look like practically?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I think learning to be a good listener and learning to ask good questions, just any questions of other people, is a great practical way to start. It just seems like we live in a world that we talk at people. I'm terrible at interrupting. I'm always trying to grow in that. I go through seasons of being a really good listener and then seasons of being so excited about whatever it is I want to say that, I jump in. And so trying to grow in that. So I think learning to, listen to people, ask them questions, be curious about their life, and that knowing that as you get to know people, you will be known also. So I think, and cultivating curiosity about the people around you is good. So vulnerability, I'm trying to think. I think you just have to do it. I think you just have to share your thoughts and feelings and put them out there. And I think that will help us to stop living in such a polarizing world. The more we actually have conversations with one another and find things in common and learn to hear other people's perspectives, it will take away, I would hope, some of that us versus them mentality. I would say don't have these conversations on social media. Don't yell at people. I don't know, like moving away from that into real conversations with people in front of you is really important. And it's just so underrated these days. So taking time to engage with people.
I'm struck when you brought up polarizing. I'm struck how that is, I think we'd probably all kind of say, yes, that's something that's happening in our culture today.
Sure.
Like this is happening. I had not thought about how that's so weaved into the conversation that we're having, that when we are vulnerable and humble, when we practice humility and vulnerability, that polarizing, that it's like it's the opposite. It directly shifts that. And that's one way in which we can practice that as individuals, within our relationships, within our communities, to shift that. Because I think that's really what is happening. Is we're in that situation because we don't share what's going on, or we just share with the people that are just like us.
Right.
And there's not a listening. But even the people that are just like us, there's a scary part there too, because if you share something that isn't just like the people that are just like you, that's scary.
It is.
Like, will this be okay? Does this, there's a way in which that polarizing isn't helpful to any of the the groups that we're polarizing into within themselves or across the table from the other.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you're talking that then we reduce people to topics or issues instead of letting them be real people. Yes. But as we begin to have conversations, with people and really get to know them, again, we actually see them as persons, as real people with thoughts and feelings and lives that aren't that different from our own in a lot of ways. And we find all of these similarities, and they're not just a topic or an issue that we may or may not agree with. So that's another reason why it's so important to have conversations and to get to know people and listen and hear, so that they're not just one thing to you that's very dehumanizing.
Yes.
And that makes it easy then to polarize ourselves, because they're not people anymore. They're just issues.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I'm so struck by these words, the dehumanizing, or earlier that the reference to valuing people. And I feel like this, you can speak to this in a bit too, but it came up in pieces, of course, in the conversation this morning, because we were looking into our history of racial hierarchy.
Yes.
And the racial hierarchy was also in this, like, who is more valuable as a human and who is less valuable. And I think we still do those. We do those kinds of things in all kinds of ways. Yeah. This valuing or devaluing, this hierarchy of value that we place on people. And we don't quite realize that that's what we're doing. But it's still that same ladder. Like if... correct me if I'm off here. And this is generalizing, but we're going to go with it for a minute. We do that in regards to politics. There is, depending on which camp you're in, the camp that you're in is up at the top of the ladder, and the camp that is the opposite is at the bottom, and maybe others are maybe a little bit closer, but not quite, like it's, and it really actually, I almost labeled a camp, and then I realized it doesn't actually matter which camp, because we do that in all of the camps. Like we have our own hierarchy that we're going off of. Right. And really it boils down to this valuing of humans. Right. And you are a more valuable human if your stance on whatever matches with my stance, because I'm usually, I think it's the I that's the the definer of the most valuable stance. The most valuable human is I, and then so it's an interesting thing to, Well,
two things. I was thinking, again, it takes the humility to recognize that's probably not a good lens to look through in life, right? But then what about the people at the bottom of the hierarchy? Do they actually feel like they're the most valuable? Yeah. Or because of the way that they're treated, do they feel like they are not valuable and not worthwhile, and that their voice doesn't matter, their life doesn't matter, their economics don't matter? Yeah. Like, I wonder if they have that same perspective that we do. Yeah. Like, at least in the racial pyramid, it was...
The racial pyramid's a whole different...
Yeah. Yeah. It's different.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think too of when we let those hierarchies be how we think about people. Now this is because we have systems that are in place with racial hierarchy.
I was just thinking that. It's not necessarily individual beliefs, but there's a system at play. There's a whole culture group, in which we live.
Culture,
that we don't necessarily aren't always aware of the currents that are flowing with that.
Not always aware of the currents that are flowing with that. That's a very good. That was much of what the workshop was. Yeah. Was being able to track the currents that are flowing. Yes. And see how long they've been flowing. Oh my goodness. And how much we're still in the flow. Yes. And I loved how Emily had talked about how it's that the looking back so that we know where we are today, so that we can look forward, so we can imagine where we can go from here. Different. It's such a beautiful thing. And the truth, it does transform. So the thing that I feel like I have two different ladders here. The thing that I wanted to share was not on the ladder that is like racial hierarchy is a ladder that's been in place for a long time.
Right.
And so I feel like there are different kinds of things that are going on with that piece. But in these other kinds of mini hierarchies that we do within ourselves, whether it be political groups or religious groups or whatever it be, how you do education. Oh my gosh. Like that's definitely, what were you thinking?
Oh, I was thinking just financial status as well.
Financial status, of course, of course. Like there's
There's a
so
lot,
many, there's so many. We make them up in all different areas. But in these mini hierarchies, when you are using yourself as the best, and whoever is the opposite is the lowest, and you're treating them in that way, it's absolutely no surprise in my practical brain that your opposites would not want to talk to you. You know what I mean? That like they would feel devalued by you, that they would feel, and that they would want to draw boundaries around that, or that they would react out in anger around that. Does this make sense?
A little bit. Tell me more.
Yeah. I think I'm thinking through how sometimes when we talk about something and people react to us in anger, sometimes we don't stop to think, I wonder if the way that I just treated that person was dehumanizing,
Right.
or like clearly devaluing them as a person. And you know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
And then we're surprised by their response.
and then we're surprised by their response, like that might be something that they'd get angry at, or,
Right.
you know, like I think I'm just, I'm thinking through those pieces that when we aren't realizing that what's actually, what we're doing here is that there's this ladder that that we're operating off of, then, when it's not vulnerability, humility that we're hanging on to, it makes a lot of sense that we'd be in a polarizing situation, that we'd be angry at each other, that we'd feel like the other people are not listening to us,
Right.
and that it would kind of perpetuate this distance.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that brings to mind that with the humility piece as well, because we were saying about people responding out of anger, or the way we treat people is part of humility too, is learning how to not walk in offense all the time.
Yeah.
I'm saying for like me personally,
Yes.
to not be just offended by differences or by people's thoughts or their stories, or if it's something that is different than what I've known to be true, to not immediately be offended. What is that? I don't know what to, but again, that humility piece of being curious. I've never heard that before. Can you tell me more? Like, and being open instead of just immediately partnering with just offended. I'm going to be offended by everything you say and do, especially if it's different than what I've thought or believed. That just puts up barriers. And then we're not able to, again, find commonality, to hear the other side of the story, to hear how we have hurt people, or how we can make things better, even if we just have this wall of always being offended at people who are different than we are. So humility is letting that wall go, letting that down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's making me think of a story that Rabbi Russell had shared on a previous podcast about a conversation that he was having with a gentleman that I believe hated Jews. And he just had said, like, oh, tell me more about that. Like, how did you come to believe that? Like, it seems very natural to be offended.
yes,
And,
right, and rightly so.
Right? But to choose that other way of curiosity, like, tell me how you came to that. Like, what was that story? And the gentleman did share a story, and there was a neat connection that they had in the midst of it.
Yeah.
But that
sometimes you can unpack hurt or experiences or ways that things have gotten distorted and out of whack, and then you can walk through that and find healing. But if you immediately leap to offense, then you're not sometimes able to get to the root of what's going on. But again, that just takes so much humility to do that, especially when people are speaking from a place of anger or hate, or they are in the wrong, but you are willing to graciously listen so that, again, with the hope that something better can come on the other side of that conversation.
Yeah. Now, for those of us who are not at the maturity space of in the moment, not acting with offense, I can relate to that. And some of the things that I have done in the past is just noticing how I react.
Yes.
And later on, when it's just me, and now for me as a Christian, it's just me and God, I will unpack that with God. Wow, I responded in anger there. That was interesting. What happened? What's going on there? And just the simple noticing of noticing what's happening in you. That has been very powerful for me. Those moments of noticing myself, even if I'm not at the stage of stopping myself yet, like that, the noticing and wondering, and it creates space to begin to have something happen. That creates that space for change and growth. And I cannot help but be thinking about how next week is Thanksgiving. And I can't help but think about how many of us might be in spaces with people that are different than us, but we're together because we have a shared thing. Family is that gift of connection that like doesn't mean we're all the same and we all think the same,
right?
But we are connected. It is a mini picture of the human family. And so that piece of getting to be around people that are very different, that we might intentionally try to not be around at different points, and noticing how we react, and noticing what comes up for us, and noticing when we get offended, and what do we do when we get offended, can start creating space to maybe join on that journey of, I wonder what it would look like for me to not get offended at all.
Right.
And what might I do when I'm not offended at all? What would curiosity look like in that situation?
Yeah. I'm just curious, outside of the conversations like with God and unpacking that, things that maybe triggered you or bothered you or made you angry in those moments, are there other resources or things that you used to continue growing on that journey?
Oh, yeah. I think it probably depends on what the topic was.
Okay, yeah.
Because this can come up in all different kinds of ways.
Yeah.
I think in my so since we're talking about race, though we keep kind of coming in and out, because this is all of life. This is all connected to all of life, as is race all connected to all of life, and conversations on racism. But in my earlier years, in having conversations with people, I think the things that really helped was remembering that people are very diverse and dynamic. Yeah. And I think asking questions in those situations, asking questions or reminding myself that, like, because it would be easy to come to judgments and to be just frustrated, or but to learn more about somebody else, even if they weren't ready to learn more about me or the things that I wanted to talk about, to learn more about somebody else did really help in grounding myself in their value, because it's tempting in those particular situations to devalue the other person. And Dr. King talks about that a lot. So there are resources of people that have talked about, like, how do you speak truth while still valuing the person that you're speaking to. And he was very intentional in that. So it was very meaningful. Brian Stevenson has that same real real tight hold on the value of people, whether or not they agree with me.
Yes.
like
Yeah.
it's just so important. As a Christian, that Jesus is another of those markers for me. And so getting into the Bible and those pieces that like how do I hang on to the value of these people so that while I'm, these things that are offending me are usually the things that it has something to do with some kind of truth that is really valuable to me. That I don't devalue the person for the value of the truth. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It's good.
And what about for you?
Oh, well, let me share something first I was thinking of, and then I can try and answer that. I was just thinking, you used the word dynamic, I think, at some point. So I was thinking if we remember, too, that everyone's in process, that we're not, sometimes we just see people and maybe we think they're at this fixed point and that's where they will always be forever.
Yes.
And so then we don't even try and work on our part. We just, like you're saying, we just stay in that, well, I knew truth and they didn't even listen.
Yeah.
We stay offended. And then, we don't really see that maybe they're growing and changing. They're in process as well. And so again, it creates a barrier instead of creating a road or a pathway for us to keep journeying. Even if we don't agree, we can still keep walking alongside one another. So I think practically, I just loved what Mike and Emily shared this morning, just about being exposed to truth. So being a lifelong learner is just really helpful.
Yes.
Because we do unpack the things in our own life that have hurt or wounded us, or the things that we think are so important that we're willing to champion, and why. But then again, how do we do that in a grace-filled way? So I think the more that we read and we learn and we have conversations, there's podcasts, getting to go to a training like today really helps me work on the places where I'm like, ooh, there's still a lot I don't know in this area. These are some familiar things that I have learned. Okay. And then this is how far I have to go. Like, that's just good. But now I know, but I'm on a journey too. And so I think recognizing that and giving myself grace, there's a lot I don't know, but I'm still growing and I'm not done yet. And the goal is to keep growing until I don't have a breath left in me. Right. Yeah. And so I think just giving myself that grace, and then putting myself in the path of people like you and the Remembrance Project people, where there's these great people that you get to be around who ask different kinds of questions than I do and think of things differently. And so it helps me consider things that I haven't maybe considered before or thought to read or notice or do or see. So I think trying to surround yourself with a lot of different people is really helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. The word proximity is coming to mind with that.
Yes.
That's been one that I've been sitting with a lot lately. And it's a good one. Mm-hmm. And proximity can be people, and it can be through books. It can be like, it's so many different ways that you can become proximate. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything else that's on your mind, Ann, that you'd want to get to share or say?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything from our conversation that you kind of want to leave us on?
Leave with you on. Maybe just that the end of what we talked about now, just being that lifelong learner. And like you said, if you are in a place where proximity is difficult because of where you live, again, starting with the resources that are available to you, and then trusting that maybe those conversations with people will pop up over time. And you might be surprised at the conversations that you have with people who you think maybe are just like you. But as you begin to learn and ask more questions, you might be surprised at the diversity in what you think is a very similar little pond of people, and all the diversity that's in there and the richness that can come from that as well. So, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.